I'm Richard Hefner, your host on The Open Mind, and the subject of our program today is the enormously compelling and seemingly quite controversial study published by Alfred A. Knopf entitled Hitler's Willing Executioners, Ordinary Germans and the Holocaust. Its author and my guest today is Daniel Jonah Goldhagen, Assistant Professor of Government and Social Studies at Harvard University. As his book's coda, Professor Goldhagen quotes from Alexis de Tocqueville's classic Democracy in America. He writes, "No man can struggle with advantage against the spirit of his age and country. And however powerful a man may be, it is hard for him to make his contemporaries share feelings and ideas which run counter to the general run of their hopes and desires." As his book's subject, Professor Goldhagen posits understanding the actions and mindset of the tens of thousands of ordinary Germans who became genocidal killers. And as his book's conclusion, Professor Goldhagen writes, quite intriguingly, that anti-Semitism moved many thousands of ordinary Germans and would have moved millions more had they been appropriately positioned to slaughter Jews. Not economic hardship, not the coercive means of a totalitarian state, not social psychological pressure, not invariable psychological propensities, but ideas about Jews that were pervasive in Germany and had been for decades, induced Germans to kill unarmed, defenseless Jewish men, women, and children by the thousands, systematically and without pity. Simply put, Professor Goldhagen writes, the perpetrators, having consulted their own convictions and morality and having judged the mass annihilation of Jews to be right, did not want to say no. So I would now ask my guest, in the light of all this, he describes the opposition to his book that has surfaced. How can we explain it? That opposition among Jews and among others. Professor Goldhagen, it astonishes me that there has been this much controversy about your book. And I wonder how you explain it, how you describe it, and how you explain it.
It's hard for me to explain why the book has been deemed so controversial. It seems to me that the position I'm taking should be the non-controversial one. I'm saying that when people who are uncoerced kill, torture, mock, degrade other people, they do it because they think it's right, because in some sense they want to. Those who are saying that my book is wrong are saying that when people kill, torture, degrade, and mock other people, uncoerced, they do it because they don't believe it's right. And they do it despite not wanting to do it. Which position should be the controversial position? Put differently, when people think of any other mass slaughter or genocide, whether the recent mass slaughter in Rwanda, the killings in the former Yugoslavia, people naturally assume that the killers believe that what they're doing was right and just. The only genocide that I know of where people say that the killers did not want to do what they did, that they believed that what they were doing was wrong, is the Holocaust, and they say this only about the German perpetrators. It's quite odd. I'm saying that in this respect, the German perpetrators were like the perpetrators of other mass slaughters.
But now I have to assume that you make an assumption about why. Why? Why do they react this way to this book?
I must say, I'm actually not interested so much in talking about other people's motives. Many people in writing about my book have been discussing my motives, particularly in Germans. Many of the German critics have imputed all kinds of motives to me.
What kinds of motives?
Motives about my attitudes towards Germans, motives related to my background, that I'm Jewish, that my father is a survivor of the Holocaust. And I maintain, and I have consistently maintained, that we should not be discussing the identities of scholars or their alleged or imputed motivations. We should be discussing the historical material, the evidence, our methods, our interpretive framework, and how we reason to our conclusions. And in fact, I've laid all these things out extremely clearly in the book, precisely so that people could take issue with every aspect of my study and with every step of my reasoning. So that's what we should be talking about. the evidence and the conclusions and the arguments.
But that's not what has been talked about among your most extreme critics.
Well, that's true, but I should say, of course, that many others have written about the book's findings and its conclusions and have assessed them, some positively, some less positively, in a sober, scholarly-like manner. You really need to put the questions to those who are invoking impermissible arguments about me and the book as to why they're doing so. I can't tell you.
You say impermissible arguments, motivation.
About my alleged motivations, about my background, about my identity. It is irrelevant to the study. All of these are relevant to the study.
And yet, when you quote Tocqueville, and I was intrigued with that, I wondered whether Tocqueville couldn't be used, this selection, couldn't be used in a sense against the position that you take. No man can struggle with advantage against the spirit of his age and country. Couldn't that be interpreted in a way as an apology, in a sense, an explanation for what the Germans did?
I must say that when I chose this for the epigram of the book, it never occurred to me that some people might read it in this way. It comes from a section of Democracy in America on why great revolutions will no longer occur, and it's really about leadership. This is about Hitler, and what it says is that no man, Hitler, no matter how powerful he is, can move people against their hopes and desires, and that is part of the argument of the book, that Hitler is as powerful a figure as he was, as charismatic as he was, could never have accomplished this had there not been tens of thousands, indeed hundreds of thousands of ordinary Germans who were willing to help him.
But of course, I had the feeling of an intense irony here. Many years ago, I edited Tocqueville's Democracy in America in a paperback edition. And whenever I see Tocqueville quoted, I take it very, very seriously. And I thought to myself, is this meant to be exculpatory? And then, no, it didn't fit with the book at all.
No, but it wasn't meant in that way. As I said, it's about Hitler's incapacity to have moved Germans against their hopes and desires, so in no sense is it exculpatory.
Okay, let's then, as you've suggested anyway, that motives should be set aside. Couldn't it be? Let's not take it from the section. Let's not consider the section where it comes. It's a statement. You took it out of context. Here it is. Isn't there a truth to this in terms of the larger question of whether indeed the Germans, the ordinary German, was an executioner?
Well, there are two issues here. If you notice, if we stick with Tocqueville, and I'm happy to for a moment, that it's in the singular, no man, not no people, but no man can struggle against. I don't have the quotation in front of me exactly. And individual Germans, of course, in Germany could have done little to have prevented what happened. But if millions of Germans had been opposed to the persecution of the Jews in the 1930s, a very radical persecution in which Jews were stripped of their citizenship, in which they were forbidden to marry non-Jews, in which they were subjected to the most intensive campaign of verbal violence in Western history. If ordinary Germans by the millions had been opposed to this, then they could have done something in unison. And as I said, had they been opposed to Hitler, as they were on other issues, the regime would have been hard-pressed to have carried out what it did and may not have even attempted it. Now, the second issue is to the perpetrators themselves, what individual German perpetrators could have done. And as I show in the book, they were offered the option, many of them, to exempt themselves from the killing by their own commanders. Every individual made choices about how to treat Jews, even the individuals who were in institutions of killing. They didn't have to struggle against the spirit of the age to stay with the Tocqueville quotation for a moment. They were just given the option. If you're not up to this, we'll give you other duties. And very few of them accepted this option, accepted the opportunity to exempt themselves from what was gruesome slaughter. And so the question remains, why, uncoerced, would people choose to kill, often at point-blank range, men, women, and children, often shooting children at point-blank range?
Now, you make the point that they had free will. You make the point about choice rather strongly. Was it as simple as all that?